Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of Caleb's Conversation Podcast. I am very honoured to have the one, the only, James Marshall. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Caleb. Let's cut the music. I don't know if your music is still playing.
Oh, it'll be cut by now, yeah.
Cut it because I want to say a few things.
Okay, go ahead, dive straight into it.
One, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Two, I think you should call this Caleb's Conversational Show.
Okay.
Not podcast, because show to me seems more grand.
Show seems more grand,
because,
okay.
you know, this is a big thing.
Yeah.
I think show is...
It's got the theatrical element of it as well.
It does. So
Okay.
I'm just your marketing advisor.
Whoa.
But I would change it, to Caleb's Conversational
Okay,
Show.
I will jot that down into constructive criticism for sure.
But you do you.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I'm very honoured to have you on.
No, it's seriously, it's great to be here.
Yeah.
We'd been planning this for a while.
It has been a hot minute, yeah, because we discussed, I discussed bringing you on a couple months ago, and one of the big things, obviously, James and I went to university together, went to film school, and we obviously have a lot in common. We say we look at the film industry in similar ways, and you have a very unique perspective because you're one of the few people that's actually, in the industry, working in the Hollywood system. So that's why I'm very excited to talk to you.
Let me just stop you there. I have worked on 2 feature films, but in no way do I kind of look at myself as, I don't know, industry professional, I guess you could say.
But you're making those baby steps and moving towards that direction.
I am. I'm trying my best and seeing how it's going, but yeah.
So again, I'm very eager to talk to you because I feel like you are one of those people that came from film school. You actually left film school to pursue this career, and that's we're going to be talking about all these different things. And I'm interested to hear because you were going to be writing and directing a television pilot show, A Christmas Murder and the Wickedly Diabolical Proceedings at the Midstow. Some of you may remember the episode I had with Holly and Helena, who were working on that production, but you were the original writer and director of that, and you were going to be spearheading this project for the Griffith graduate slate, and then you had to step away last minute because you had this opportunity working on the upcoming Elvis film. So tell us a bit about that story and what it was like making that decision-making process of like, all right, I need to step away from this project that is my baby and I've crafted and that I love in order to hopefully make that step towards the career that I hope that I can get one day.
Yeah, well, it was kind of, you're right. It was, I'd worked on this project for a long time. I think it was about a year that I'd worked on the script because I did it in script 2. Mm-hmm. And then I also developed it in that other... What was that other subject?
PDD, project development, something. Yeah.
Something like that. It was very helpful.
Yeah.
And I think it helped the script a lot. And it got to a stage where myself and my producer were really happy with the story and got up to pitch in front of everyone and was very, very honored and it was very humbling that we got picked. And we were really happy with what we had. Went into POC, which was our proof of concept scene, and really, really happy with the whole atmosphere that we created. And the cast, I thought, was great. Thanks to Caleb, who was on as casting supervisor. And we were at a stage, I was at a stage where I was really, really happy with the project. And then I'd had, though, in the background, this sort of potential job to work on Elvis because I'd had an interview. I got a call out of the blue from one of the production coordinators who said, hey, we're looking for an assistant for Baz Luhrmann if you're interested for an interview. And I said, I think you have the wrong person because I am wildly unqualified for that role.
He's being very humble, guys.
No, this would have been my first job on a proper feature. I'd done work experience on commercials and short film projects from, by Screen Queensland, but nothing to this scale. So I was out of my depth, I thought. But straight away went into the interview, completely flunked it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, it wasn't necessarily a bad interview, but I think because I was so excited and so wanting this position, just to work on the film in general, I
overcooked it?
I did, and I kind of knew straight away that I wasn't their guy, and which was okay. And I'm glad, in hindsight, I'm glad that I didn't get, put forward for that role. So then that was kind of sitting in the background. I told my producer, hey, I've had this interview. There might be a chance, but I doubt I will ever get this position.
The wonderful Carmen Chan, the producer of A Christmas Murder.
Yeah, that's right. And so I kind of forgot about that interview. We went ahead, filmed our scene, and, went away with a lot of, I think, criticism, and which is what I liked and which is what I really wanted to have. I'm glad that people weren't too... I felt like the teachers didn't really see the vision or whatnot. I think... I think anyway is that they kind of wanted to play it safe in a way, whereas I wanted to be really bold and loud and different. And for people not to kind of like it, I was like, hey, I think this is good. And then, we were headed straight into principal photography. And then I got a call from one of the on-set PAs of Elvis, said, hey, would you like to come in for an interview? I said, absolutely. And then about 2 days later, I got another call from the props manufacturer coordinator who said, hey, we're looking for a runner to start in 2 weeks. We like what we see. We're not really looking for too much experience, just more or less someone who is passionate about the industry and will do a good job. And I said, hey, I think that's me.
That's awesome.
So, and we had these sort of phone call interviews and a lot of back and forth between the coordinator and myself, and got to a point where she said, if you say yes, it's kind of your job. So I, without any thought, immediately said yes, and then thought, oh God, how do I, how am I going to
explain this to everyone? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like to an extent I didn't leave things as well as I could have. And I think because it just happened so quickly, 2 weeks I was, working on Christmas Murder and planning planning principal. And then, 2 weeks later, I was, on the same set as Tom Hanks and Baz Luhrmann. And it was very weird for me. It was a very weird transition, and it happened so quickly. So I feel like maybe I didn't kind of tie things up as well as I could have. But I think the person who I handed over the film, which was Helena, I think she did a really, really great job.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, and, I feel like everyone didn't quite understand my vision that I had for it. I don't think I even understood the vision, but I definitely think it was toned back to be a more sort of grounded film. And I think that's kind of, to do with teachers' feedback and whatnot. Whereas, I made a short film in year 2, which was Monroe. And I'm not necessarily very happy with that project. I think the actors and the group was awesome. The experience making it was really, really awesome. But overall, looking back at the film, I'm not happy with it at all. And I kind of blame myself, obviously. And I sort of blame the feedback that I got. And it turned out to sort of be, I was directing somebody else's vision, AKA my supervisor. So, and whereas I wanted A Christmas Murder to just purely be my own thing. And as well, I think Carmen has as much credit as I guess, as much of a writing credit as I do. Towards the end in third year, it was sort of Carmen and I that were going back and forth, refining the script and getting it to a point where we were really happy. And then to all of a sudden say, hey, bye, see ya.
Well, yeah, it was definitely, I can imagine putting myself in your shoes in that situation, and it would have definitely been a difficult decision, but you made the right decision. And I feel like everyone who was involved in the project with you was on that same page of like, this is the right move that you need to do. It was obviously not ideal because we were 2 weeks out from shooting principal photography, so we had to get a new director. Carmen was obviously, scrounging around trying to get all these last minute details, getting ready for the shooting period. Yeah. So it wasn't ideal. Let's be real, but we all knew you were making the right decision and that you were coming from the right place. And, we obviously wished you all the best. And from the sounds of things, it's been working out really well. And I am eager to hear your perspective on Elvis, but I just want to touch on something that you just spoke about before, about trying to fulfill the vision of the teachers. And I feel like that's an interesting idea of like not only fulfilling the teachers' perspectives because they're marking these projects and giving like a grade to it so that they can mark it within a university system, but I also think it's reflective of how the studio system works within Hollywood, is that these executive producers and all these, people that don't involve themselves in the creative side of a project, how they'll sit down, review a project, and then give all these notes. And sometimes it's vastly different to what the director is trying to intend with the project, and feel like that's so detrimental in so many projects. And you can really tell sometimes when you watch a movie and you be like, you can feel this is just made by committee, and that the producers have just got their fingers in there and just like screwed around with it. And sometimes that trust with the director who's spearheading this creative project, I feel like there needs to be more of that. I do understand the reasoning that they obviously try and make it better, but a lot of times these people don't understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, with a teacher changing a student film, it's obviously a much smaller scale. But I think you're right. It's still the same kind of principle that applies to when you step onto the bigger features, and even series, or it could be anything. But, I mean, it happened on Elvis as well. I mean, Baz's first script that he wrote, the Warner Brothers said no to.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because it was too big, it was too glamorous, it was too much money, it was too many sets, and it was just too much for Warner Brothers. But what we ended up shooting ended up being the first script. So
oh, really?
So I guess
interesting.
He got his own way in the end, which you don't say no to Baz. But yeah, I mean, a most recent example with a director I like is Zack Snyder with Justice League. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I don't know. Have you seen?
I did watch the Snyder Cut, yeah.
Yeah, and your thoughts?
I didn't like it.
Really?
No.
Wow.
It was very distinctly a Zack Snyder film, and I felt like his vision was far more cohesive than the Warner Brothers crap that we got originally in theaters. So I would have much preferred if they stuck with Zack Snyder and we got his version originally. However, in saying that, there was just a lot in that movie that I was just like, it didn't need to be 4 hours long to begin with. It was just so much filler. And it was definitely a film that was like, all right, let's give all this backstory to these characters that you've never met before and then bring them together. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that just made the film bloated, and the pacing to me was just really off.
Yeah, you're right.
But did you enjoy it though?
I did.
Okay, because this was what I find interesting about the movie is that some people really liked it and some people didn't. And that, to me, I think is a testament to Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, because he's a very polarizing person with regards to what the movies he makes, because some people love them and some people hate them. Like I know Batman v Superman was panned by critics and a lot of fans didn't like it.
That's right.
I now look back on BVS with rose tinted glasses. I actually, I quite enjoy it for what it is.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, yeah.
Yeah, but Justice League is a recent example of a movie that clearly has a made by committee Joss Whedon version, and then we have the very distinct Zack Snyder version. And now there's two versions of the Justice League that we can look at and be like, that's an example of it working badly. And depending on your thoughts on the Zack Snyder version, that's an example of it looking really good.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting to see how the creative process can change so vastly, because there's opportunities like where you can get on set and get a story out there, but there's also opportunities where that same story can get chopped up and changed really like crazily in the edit.
That's right, yeah. And, going back to teachers changing your film, I was pretty disappointed with Monroe, because I'd planned it for a long time and I had these big visions of what I wanted it to be, and very, old school Hollywood, very glamorous, and it ended up being, I don't know what it was. It wasn't me, and I didn't feel right with it. So that's why I knew Christmas Murder. I thought I really want to make it my own thing, and we copped a lot of criticism for it being too bold, and the characters were too big and needs to be toned down a bit, and why have you got a miniature hotel thing, and it doesn't make sense with the real set that you've got. And I was like, well, it's just meant to be.
Yeah.
You just have to go along with it. It's not meant to make sense. I mean, already the story in itself is stupid because it's meant to be this cliche, murder mystery set at Christmas time. Already it's kind of a cliche, over the top premise. And I thought we want to kind of, reflect that with the characters being being bold, and the world that they're in being this kind of almost Tim Burton-esque kind of gothic. And yeah, I kind of always looked at it like a gothic kind of Christmas film in a way.
Well, I feel like, when you come to film school, so many people want to have that on-set experience and actually get to practice the art of filmmaking. And film school, in my opinion, is the time where you need to be learning and making mistakes, so that once you leave film school and actually make it into industry, that you don't make those same mistakes. So I feel like you going through that process of trying to experiment and bring your voice to life, I feel was totally fine. And it's one of those things is like trying to rein back the right amount, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a tricky balance, especially when you're trying to give criticism and trying to help an art form that is very much so subjective. I think that's the trickiest thing, because everyone likes different things. People, gravitate towards different styles of genres, and some people like horror, some people don't. So it's all those sort of things. It's like, well, it doesn't make sense to bring someone in who doesn't like horror to critique a horror film, because they're not going to sync up, if you know what I mean.
That's right.
So it's sometimes tricky in that respect as well.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny as well, you mentioned uni being a place where you can kind of make mistakes, and I think that's true. And I have some thoughts about uni, which, we can maybe get into later. But yeah, one thing I do appreciate it for is that it is a place where I think, as a group, collectively, you can all make mistakes. And, you can look back at it, like for Monroe, going back to Monroe, I can look back at that. And I don't necessarily, look at it like, oh God, I hate this film. But I look at it as a thing like, hey, this is what I set out to do. This is what we got, and this is how I can learn from it. Whereas, you get into the real world, the real industry, if you make mistakes, you will get fired.
Yeah, pretty much.
Whereas if you make mistakes here, it's like, the teachers just say, hey, I wouldn't have done this. Maybe you should do that. And you might get a few friends that hate you for 2 weeks or whatever. But yeah, the real world, you will get fired if you make enough mistakes anyway. So
yeah, I totally understand. Now, you've just teased me. I want to hear these things that you have to say about uni now.
No.
Please do share.
Well, it's interesting because I know we had that conversation about your first podcast, and I was thinking back to it, when COVID did hit. I feel like the way that they handled it, I wasn't happy with it, and I did not enjoy third year for the time that I was in it anyway. I didn't really enjoy it, but in saying that, I don't know how they could have done it differently.
Yeah, it's hard because as it was going through, I was also in that same boat of I was not in agreement with a lot of the decisions they made, because when COVID first started, the reality was no one knew what the fuck was going on. Everyone was in chaos, and everyone was like, all right, is this something that we need to be worried about? Is this not? And it actually wasn't until I think Tom Hanks got COVID when he came down to like the Gold Coast or whatnot.
That's right.
That people were like, oh shit, Tom Hanks has COVID, and people started freaking out.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we all know the timeline and the story behind COVID, but obviously the film school got shut down as a result and was shut down for a couple of months. And I guess my perspective on it was because I was in charge of the whole casting process for the graduate slate, as well as casting A Christmas Murder specifically. So as someone who was deeply involved in the acquisition of actors and bringing them on board for these projects, it was tricky because we had to abandon the casting process for a couple months, and then it restarted super last minute, and we had to basically conduct online auditions where people, or I should say actors, submitted self-tapes of a scene that we emailed to them, and they performed the scene and then send it back as a video to us.
Which I don't know if you liked, but I quite liked it.
I did as well, but it's one of those things where you have to rely on the actor's interpretation of the script, and you can't give direction on the spot, so you kind of only get one version, and that's about it. Unless you're working with an actor who does a really good multiple versions, but most actors just did one and done. So
yeah, it saves the awkwardness of being in person to say that they're trash, but not
yeah, well, that is true. I'll say does.
No offense, actors.
Yeah, it's true though. Like sometimes you just get a video and it's just like, sorry, that's not the right one. Just you got to move on to the next one. And that's one of the hardest things about the casting process. And this was something I think I might have said to you or some other people around the casting process whilst we were going through it, is that you have to be cutthroat. Like it's obviously you want to be nice, and we're both very pleasant people, and we have nice personalities, but the reality is, especially when you're trying to find the right person for a role, sometimes you have to be like, sorry, you're not the right person. and then move on to the next one. But then when you do find that right person, it just feels so much more gratifying because you're like, that's the person that we can trust to bring this character that we've created for the from a script and bring him to life on the screen. So that sort of process I found really rewarding, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, it was an interesting process because then we got to that stage where, we were conducting self-tapes, and then we got the go-ahead last minute again to conduct in-person auditions. And I am of the opinion that I think chemistry tests are a huge part of the casting process where you bring in your shortlisted actors that you think might be best.
That's right.
And then bring them into a room and try them all out together and experiment the scenes and see which actors work best together and which ones you think would be great to see on screen together. Anyway, so we got the opportunity to do that, and I was very grateful for it. And I feel like even though you weren't there for principal, you had the experience on POC, which we heard some stories about with regards to our actors not necessarily being on the same page. So that was a good opportunity of being like, okay, now let's make sure that we get the right actor for principal. And from what I heard from Helena, she was very impressed and very grateful for the chemistry that Candice and Paula had on screen. And I feel like that's so important because if your actor's getting along, it just makes it even more believable on screen. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if when I was on board, our actors kind of had different viewpoints and priorities and whatnot. But I think that worked well because the characters weren't necessarily meant to like each other. I think if they didn't like each other outside, that was great for me. And I don't really care about the awkwardness of, they don't like each other. Whereas I think maybe moving into principal, some people felt more comfortable that they liked each other, which is fair enough. But for me, I don't care about that. I stuck to my guns, and the reason why I casted particular people is because that's who I felt at the time were the best people.
We were on the same page as well. The original two choices were the right ones in the moment.
For sure, yeah.
Now, the next thing that I want to jump on with you is that you said that you didn't like the way that they handled film school, and I just want to add on to that again, is that because I was of the opinion that I felt like we should have just delayed everything until COVID was dealt with. But again, looking back in hindsight, that was probably not the right call to be made because obviously we're still dealing with COVID now. Because I considered deferring for a year and then just coming back the next year afterwards.
Yeah.
And I decided against that because I didn't want to abandon this great group of people that I had come to meet and work with. So I didn't want to abandon that and then miss out on that experience of grad slate and then come back the next year and do it with a bunch of new people. So I didn't want to do that. So I stuck
doing
it
with a bunch of new people in the role that you probably wouldn't want because, the tricky thing is if you did defer, you might not get that same casting position that you wanted.
Yeah, it was an interesting process, and I feel like obviously COVID was one of those situations where it really left everyone so second guessing themselves and the decision making process. And is there anything more that you wanted to expand on with regards to the way the film school handled it?
Yeah, I mean, not really, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it wasn't in this.
They were in a shitty situation, let's be fair.
Yeah, and it wasn't in their, schedule of, all right, well, we've got screen distribution here, we've got grad slate screenings here, and we've got COVID pandemic here.
Yeah.
It was just, for everyone, no one knew how to deal with it. And I think they did it in the best way that they could have. Did I like how they, did I like what was done? No. And I think as well, it was just because when you're in first year, everyone, third year grad film is like the big thing. Everyone's working towards, oh my God, it's so exciting. And to finally be in that position, thinking like, yes, we've made it, we're making a film, we're all wanting to make, and then for COVID just to say,
yeah, we got royally fucked, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it was just disappointing to end the year, I didn't really end the year with grad film, but, to go into that year, ending it that way.
Ending on a kind of the low.
Yeah, and I heard that the screenings weren't as good as they could have been. Not many people went. I don't know. I wasn't really there
for the official Griffith one. It was pretty, students and faculty turned up. It was a pretty decent turnout. But for the friends, family, and cast screening, that was a stacked theatre.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, that was awesome because just jumping onto that, so that was a fascinating experience, especially for watching A Christmas Murder, because when you watch a project that you're so heavily involved in and you know the ins and outs of it and you know how a shot was conceived and you know what the actor was doing here and what the director's intending here, when you're so involved in the process, you're like, all right, I understand what's going on. But then when you show it to an audience who has no idea what to expect, no idea what's coming, and they're just watching it cold, that is a fascinating experience. Because I remember when A Christmas Murder ended, because it ends on a cliffhanger and it's like to be continued at the end, the whole theater erupted and was like, oh no.
Really?
It was insane. And that's the experience that we all wanted, right?
Yeah.
And to have that was just like so gratifying, because it was like, clearly everyone was so invested in the story and the characters and they wanted to know what was going to happen next. But then when you rip that from underneath them and leave them on a cliffhanger, it's like, and that, because it could have been a situation of like, oh, that's it? Okay.
Yeah. And people are satisfied. Okay, that's the end of the story.
But when you have people like wanting to know what happens next, that's what you want. And I feel like that kind of left us in a really good place. So I was happy in that respect. But, you know, it's one of those things, like obviously with Grad Slate, I was very impressed with the quality of the films that were made despite everything that we went through, considering we were all on student budgets and all that sort of thing. So I was very impressed, and I'm glad that we got through it all in the end. But yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Now let's move on to your experience working on Elvis. So what was the actual role and what were your duties and responsibilities in that project? Because obviously working with Baz Luhrmann and having people like the likes of Tom Hanks on set, I assume it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. I was a props manufacturer runner. So basically, it's kind of like a subsection of the art department. When you work on a big feature, and for Elvis, we were split up into lots of different kind of subcategories amongst art. So you have your art department itself, which is the big one. Mm-hmm. Then you have set decorating, which is set dec, props manufacture, which is where I was. And then you have the greens, who kind of dress, all the landscaping of, the sets outdoors and whatnot. Then we had soft furnishings, which was, refining old furniture. And then there was one, practical lighting is another one that we have. And scenic, which is paint. So they paint all the big set pieces. So yeah, our department was it's about 20 people. It was a smaller department. It was really sort of tight-knit group, and it was awesome. Like really, really fun. And basically, we were our department was in charge of kind of manufacturing, set pieces that you couldn't just buy at a store. And we're also refurnishing, old vintage furniture and, going back to making things that you just couldn't, because Baz has these crazy, and Baz and Catherine Martin, his wife, just have these crazy, crazy ideas. And, you can't just go into an antique store and say, hey, I'll get that. They're really niche things like, making Elvis's gun, or Tom Hanks, he has all these canes in the film, and they were all just custom made pokey machines, and everything like that was just, that was what our department was in charge of. And it was my job to kind of make sure, I think because we were such a small department, amongst this massive film, I was a runner as well as an assistant, so to speak. But yeah, I was in charge of my own credit card, and every week you'd have to reconcile your credit card payments with accounts. I, had to make sure everyone in the workshop who was there was, getting the stock and supplies that they needed to make the props for the film, and yeah, just a bunch of different other things. Yeah.
It sounds really exciting. I can imagine that. It's funny how you mentioned how there was like 20 people working in your team, and
that was our entire
but like that small team is a very small cog in a very huge operation. And that's one of the things I find funny is like when people ask, what do you want to do in the movie making industry? It's like, just watch the credits of any film and just see how many people work on a film. Like, you play a very small but important role in the creation of this film. And you'll just be one of those little names in the credits, but what you do is so important in order to make sure that this train is moving along the train tracks very smoothly.
Yeah, my head of department, he was awesome. And, when I was first starting, was meeting people, I'd always introduce myself. Oh, hi, I'm James, I'm just the runner. And yeah, he sort of pulled me aside and he said, hey, don't stop saying you're just the runner. He said, without runners, he said people in our workshop don't get supplies to make the props in turn. There's no props for the film. Baz can't make his film. And I said, hey, don't put that pressure on me. I don't like that kind of pressure. But I felt, it was a fantastic stepping stone because, like I said, I'd worked on a few small projects, but they were only, 1-2 day things that I was on. Whereas this one, I worked on Elvis for 7 months. And
It was down at the Gold Coast that it was being filmed, right?
Yeah, at the Village Roadshow Studios. The whole film was done there. There are only a few external locations that they shot at for some of the sets, but besides that, everything was shot at the studios, which I think is great for Australia and local businesses around the area and whatnot. And the great thing about Baz as well is that he really pushed for this film to be made in Australia. I mean, all his films are made in Australia, but it's purely because he just wants to create local jobs.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I really respect that because that's one of the big things is that in Australia, our film industry is quite small, and obviously because we're so at the will of Screen Queensland and Screen Australia, these government bodies that kind of dictate the funding for a lot of our projects, as a result, we just don't get a lot of stuff made here.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is that a lot of Hollywood and foreign stuff comes to Australia to film here because it's a bit cheaper to film here and stuff. And obviously we have the facilities and the crew and stuff. So it's one of those tricky things of like, obviously here in Australia, we'd love to be making great content and competing on the same level as the UK and the US, but we just don't have the budget for it. In saying that, Baz Luhrmann doing that, I think, is really admirable, and I appreciate him doing that.
Yeah, and it's odd because it's such an American film. I mean, Elvis is this American icon, and the whole story is kind of a reflection on America. So it's very odd that it's kind of filmed in Australia, but it's also really great.
When you're watching the movie, you'll never know.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the sets that you look at the monitor and see, just it's so odd that that was just filmed on Soundstage 9 or whatever. It's a very surreal experience.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Because you had met Baz Luhrmann before your experience on Elvis. So what was it like having met him previously to then be on the same set working with him? Because I assume you would have interacted with him briefly whilst you were working on the project, correct?
Yeah, a few times, like very, very briefly.
So what was it like seeing him in action and watching that sort of process unfold?
He's a psychopath. He's in a good way. I think I really, really admire Baz Luhrmann, but I think, keeping it, they say never meet your heroes. And I think, never work with your heroes. So the brief encounters that I had with him were enough, I think, for me to still respect him.
That's fair.
But no, I think, when you watch his films, to me anyway, like Romeo and Juliet and even Moulin Rouge, to me they feel like kind of experimental pieces. I feel like Baz maybe, he was still figuring out his style of being wacky and crazy. Whereas Gatsby, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And the same with Elvis. I think he had a very, very clear vision of what he was doing. And but he's still as crazy and mental, and he's so fast-paced on set, and people can't keep up with him, and his demands are just insane. So
I'll say when you get to a position like that, you definitely need to make sure that you're got a plan in action and that you're fulfilling every step of the way so that you can quickly and efficiently move throughout the process, because so many people can take their time and then before you know it, the time is gone. And that's when you get into trouble, because then you haven't got what you need done, and then that just makes the post-production phase so much more complicated. So
and I mean, because he's a bit of a maniac, at least he has something to show for it. Like, he is very, very good at what he does, and he knows what he's talking about. So and I think for someone who was directing a student film and who went through uni really loving the whole the process of being the director, to actually see an industry professional up on the stage talking to the actors and communicating, it was really, really, really inspiring, I guess you could say, and just very educational in a way. So
would that be the one thing that you took away from the experience? Is that, or was there anything else that really stood out to you throughout your time?
I don't know. I just, it was such a crazy film because, people that know me well, I'm a big sucker for old nostalgia, particularly sort of post World War II, sort of 50s and 60s, and this film was, the 50s to the 70s, documenting 30 decades of Elvis's life and a bit of his childhood as well. And I'm a fan of Baz, which was another plus, and I'd also been a fan of Elvis himself. So I think just the whole experience, and every day was kind of pinch yourself moment for me, walking on these just magnificent sets. I mean, it's everything you could imagine a Baz Elvis film would be. It's this massive fever dream.
That's so sick. I'm so happy for you, man.
Thank you.
Do we have a release date for this film yet?
I think it's June next year. So
June next year. I'm super excited for it because I'm not super familiar with Elvis and his backstory and the steps he had to take in order to get to one of the most famous musicians on the planet. So with the likes of the Queen movie that came out recently and the Elton John one, we've had a lot of really cool musical biopics on these great musicians. So to add this to the list, I'm very excited, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all unfolds. So.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, Elvis has had biopics made about him, I think he said 3 already, but I think this film is the sort of definitive version or depiction of...
Yeah, the big budget one.
Yeah, and I think, it's a Baz film. It's you're either going to love it or hate it. I don't think there's sort of an in-between. But yeah, it's very, very different to what people will think. I can't say too much because Warner Brothers will come chasing me.
I'm excited to see how the main actor that's playing Elvis, what's his name again? I've forgotten.
Austin Butler.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how he does it.
He's so good. Yeah, we've seen a bit of footage of him, and he's just
because Elvis
fantastic.
is one of those strange people where you get a lot of Elvis impersonators, and a lot of people like to pretend to be Elvis, especially like in Las Vegas and whatnot.
Yeah.
So to see, I can imagine that casting process would have been fascinating. To find the right person. But I'll say I'm really looking forward to that, and I can't wait until next year when all the Elvis songs become.
Me too. Yeah.
Come back into the zeitgeist and start hearing them on the radio and on the top charts. So,
That's it.
Now, the next film that you have worked on is the film being directed by Ron Howard called 13 Lives. Do you want to just tell me a bit about the process of transitioning from Elvis, which you had worked on for several months, to then smoothly transition into the next project and next bit of work in your career?
Yeah, so I finished Elvis on a Friday, and then on the following Monday, I started on 13 Lives. So I was straight into it. There was no sort of break, and yeah, it was a lot different because obviously the story was completely different. It wasn't this,
Were you doing the same role?
Very similar. I was in set deck, which is set decorating, and props.
Okay.
So, kind of similar, but I think...
Working with similar people as well, or...?
Yeah, similar people.
Awesome.
Similar people jumped over from Elvis. And, but yeah, so set decorating and props, they're a much bigger department than props manufacture were. So yeah, there was a lot more pressure, I felt, and it was a lot more... It was a crazy experience, and there were 2 runners in the department. It was just very, very busy all the time, and but it was interesting because Elvis is, it's this glamorous, it's Baz's interpretation of this icon, and you're walking the streets of Las Vegas, whereas now we were in the thick, disgusting mud of Thailand, and we're in, gumboots and slipping in mud. And yeah, we were down at Madraba, which is down past the Gold Coast. And we were in the full rain and cold, and it was it wasn't as cushy as Elvis, let's just say. And yesterday was actually the last day of shoot. So now it's just the pack up process. But it's very, very different experience, and the whole story is a completely different. It's interesting because they're two stories that are taken from real life, but told in a completely different way.
What is the story of 13 Lives? Isn't it based off a true event?
Yes.
Because I remember hearing about it ages ago and I've forgotten. So
it was a Thai soccer team, and they ventured into these caves after a game of soccer, and got trapped in this cave system. And they were trying to get out, but they had the rain hit in Thailand and flooded them in.
Oh, okay.
And they were just banked up in pitch black in what they call them chambers. So they were in the furthest chamber, in chamber 9, and they were stuck there for 18 days.
Damn.
Yeah, and it's an amazing, I mean, look, you can read what happens at the end of the film, basically. You just have to read the story. But yeah, it was the most amazing rescue and successful rescue as well. And so yeah, it was really, really interesting to be part of the film because the whole process of rescuing them was so complex.
I can imagine, and that's one of the things I find interesting when filmmakers take a true story and bring it into a movie setting, is that obviously you want to try and dramatize it and add a fictional element, and also take the important stuff and put it into that 2-hour time frame, because obviously this would have obviously taken place over, like you said, a long time.
Yep.
So to condense that into a 2-hour digestible size, I can imagine is very tricky, but I can imagine as a director or a writer, it would be one of the exciting challenges of taking a dramatic story like this and then, you know, bringing that to the screen for an audience to really enjoy. Because like I've watched films that, you know, obviously are inspired by true events. The recent example that I watched was Deepwater Horizon, which was the movie that depicted the events that happened when there was that big BP oil spill somewhere in the ocean near America or whatnot.
Yep.
And that was a fascinating movie because obviously it detailed that experience so well and all the mistakes that led up to it. And then, I don't know, Mark Wahlberg. It's a movie with Mark Wahlberg, but
Yep.
you know. Anyway, so yeah, I think when filmmakers take concepts that are taken from the real world and then put their own movie spin on it, I think is always interesting. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So hopefully Ron Howard hits it out of the park. But you know, Ron Howard's again one of those filmmakers where he has a track
usually
record.
always does a good job.
Yeah.
And he definitely takes this to a very emotional, part of the story, and you know, it's a very kind of grounded look at it, whereas, you know, Elvis was a very over the top
Of course, yeah.
look at him. But yeah, Ron Howard takes it down a notch, and yeah, it's a very, very sad story actually. You know, it had a great outcome, but just the whole process of getting them out is very sad and very tense as well. I think the film's going to be really, really good. Yeah. And it's got a really, really great cast attached to it as well.
Sweet. Now, I know a lot of these Hollywood projects are coming to Australia, but the reality is it is still a Hollywood film. So I'm curious to ask you, what do you think it's like working within the Hollywood system, and what are the things that really stood out to you when you were in there that was like, wow, and then you had to kind of adjust your thought process? Was it?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of finding your place in the hierarchy, because there is a hierarchy in film. And I mean, any industry, there's always a hierarchy, but I think it's more prevalent in film.
Yeah, it's very obvious. And to quickly, you know, add on to that, the film industry is very much so, like you said, there's a hierarchy. And if you want to get to where you want to be, it's very much you have to climb that ladder. And I'm interested to hear your perspective on this actually, because a lot of people in film school especially, you know, have all these aspirations of, I want to be a director, or I want to be a producer, or you know, I want to be an editor. But those positions that people often aspire towards are often the top of the hierarchy. They're normally the top dogs of that area within that sort of industry.
And this is why I don't like film school, is because, you know, the teachers just say, all right, get into a group and choose, you know, who's going to be director and who's going to be the producer. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It never works like that. And, you know, who's going to be your DOP? Yeah, you just choose in amongst the group. It doesn't work like that. And, you know, it's years and years of, you know, gaining that kind of, gaining that position. And, you know, they don't teach you the sort of steps you need to take if you really do want to pursue that.
Yeah, because you really do have to. If you want to get to where you want to be in life, you have to do all those assistant roles, you know, all the sort of stuff that where you do the grunt work in order to one day climb that ladder to get where you want to be. And do you think that is the case? Is that it's really much so if you want to be top of the line, that you have to like kind of go through that sort of process?
Oh, yeah. I mean, luck has a lot of play in it as well. You just sort of have to be lucky. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't really tell you because I don't even know how you would get to that position. And then, again, it just depends what you want to do. And I think what is good though about working on these two big features is that you realize there are so many more roles that are achievable. I think a lot of people finish film school thinking, oh, how am I going to be a director now? How am I going to produce what I want? So, well, no, and or how am I going to be a production designer? Well, no, you can start out as a runner in props, and then you can move up to being an assistant in set decorating, or there are on-set, props. There are set dressers. There's what's called swing gang, where it's sort of coming in and building up the sets and taking them down. There's all sorts of positions. There's graphic artists. There's art. Supervising art designers and directors, and there's so many positions, which I think is reassuring, but also at the same time it's maybe too much, where you're just like, all right, now I really don't know what I want to do.
Yeah, you definitely need a small army in order to make a film. And that's one of the things I find interesting is that, a lot of people have their sights set on a specific role and say, all right, that's what I want to do. But like you just said, there's so many other roles that are within that same field that you could do that would be still really productive and might be really engaging for you. But again, everyone's got their own sort of system and plans and ways they go through it. So
and things will change so quickly. I mean, when I was in film school, God, I hate to say it, but I was that person that, I want to be writer director.
So many people are, dude. You're not alone. So I definitely was when I first came to film school.
For sure.
And then my horizons were just broadened massively. So
yeah, and I realized that, though I think, it's fun doing it on a student film level with your friends, I think in the real world, maybe I don't want to do that. And I thought, a way to kind of get to that stage would be to go through the AD department, which is assistant directing. And I don't know, being on set, it's not a very nice place to be. Being in the art department, you're kind of away from all that. And I quite like being in the art department. And now my focus has shifted, I would like to stay in the art department as opposed to going through the AD world. Because bleep this, fuck that.
Yeah.
it's and that's just from my experience. Some people love it. Some people love the chaos and love being talked down to, and I don't know, just my experience, it can be very toxic and very stressful for no reason. Every job in film is stressful, but I think it's just different levels of stress.
No, you're 100% right. And I've heard stories from not only you, but from a few different people of people that work on set and inside that Hollywood landscape. And I feel like, yes, it's a sad reality, but, the reality is people are in these positions of power and they need to get a job done. And sometimes people have to get the brunt force of that, which is not ideal. And I think it's interesting when you work on a student film, when you're working with your friends and you're working on a project together and you're all having fun bringing this thing to life. But when you're in a professional environment, you're not working with friends, you're working with colleagues. Yep. And that can sometimes, it's a different dynamic working with those sort of people. So I've definitely heard those sort of stories before, and to me that's one of the reasons why I've abandoned, or I should say put on pause, my pursuit of a career in the movie making industry, because I have the things that I specialized in uni and the things that I would like to do within movie making, like we just previously discussed, I can't easily get into straight away. Yep. So it's one of those things, like I don't want to go through the process of trying to climb that ladder to maybe one day make it. You know what I mean? So, but then again, I'm very fortunate. I'm in a position where I love sport and I love filmmaking. So I'm combining those two and doing that as my career now. Like I work in sport broadcasting as a camera operator. Fantastic. And I'm very grateful to have already slid straight into where I want to be, and I'm already working at a few different companies doing exactly where I want to be, what I want to do. So
awesome.
I'm again one of those rare cases of I'm finishing up uni and I'm already working in industry exactly where I want to be. So
and again, that might change. I mean, you 5 years down the track, you might, I want to move back into film, which I think is good. Working in the arts, you kind of have that flexibility.
Yes, flexibility is huge.
Yeah, where you can, you have to reach a kind of level where you can, say, hey, I'd like to do this role now, and put the feelers out and whatnot. I think when you're starting, you can kind of just take what you can get. But I think, you can get to a level where you can say, hey, maybe I don't want to be a runner anymore. Maybe I don't want to be a camera operator, whatever it might be. But
because that's a huge thing, is that I feel like so many people either come out of high school or they come out of uni and then they get stuck in a job where it's working 5 days a week, 9 to 5, and then that's what they do for the next 40, 50 years of their life.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're in a strange position where we work in an industry where it's like the job security isn't great.
Yeah, it's awful.
But at the same time, you have the flexibility to be like, all right, I have an interest in this and I want to pursue that and I'm going to do that and make my living doing that. And some people have great success doing it. Some people don't. I know the acting community is obviously, that's the worst job security you can have.
It's a tough gig, yeah.
Yeah. So it's, again, everyone has their own drive in life. And as long as you're doing something that you enjoy and that is not only productive for yourself, but productive for society, I think that's what's most important.
Definitely. I mean, some people are, they're happy working that 9 to 5 job, which I can respect and I can see I think I'm one of those people who wouldn't be too fussed doing that. I quite like job security. I don't know why I want to enter this industry then. But, I think while I'm young, I just want to work on as many films as I can. And I'm quite happy being a runner, to be honest. There's a lot of perks and I get to see a lot of stuff that, people in the production office, they
don't get to see. Yeah.
They don't get to see. It's, people in production office, the art coordinators and people like that, they're just office jobs, really. And, it's a shame they don't get to go out on location and see the sets, whereas, runners, yeah, they get to see all of it, and the occasional coffee run, which I don't mind. I quite like. Quite like. So, yeah.
Well, I think we're both in agreement, and everything that you've said thus far is going to lead again and give me more evidence toward this statement. I've said it so many times, but it's who you know, not what you know. And if you can make the right connections and meet the right people and make a good impression, it's so much more beneficial, because you can be an expert in script writing or an expert in sound design. But if you don't make those connections and meet the right people, and it's not going to be beneficial for you. And I think you're a good example of making good impressions on people within industry, and that has set you up quite well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, when I was on Elvis, one of the mold makers, his mum was a coordinator on 13 Lives and said, hey, they're looking for a runner. I'll give you.
Yeah, that's how it works, man. It's just, it's one of those things, like, if you can make the right connections, it's just going to bounce from project to project, and that's where you get a sense of community. A sense of consistency, and again, it's just one of those things. Like, again, once you've made it, it makes once you've made it inside the room, once you've got past that first door, things open up for you. But so many people close themselves off and don't allow that opportunity to get past that first door. And then that's when they stagnate, and then that's when their careers flop.
For sure, yeah.
So, yeah, again, congratulations on making
it. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, something else I want to talk to you about, and this is a very hot button and slightly controversial topic. Whilst we're on the subject of Hollywood, I would like to get your opinions on cancel culture and all that at the moment.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did not know the conversation was going. Yeah.
So what's your opinions on that sort of side of the film industry and all the cultural shifts that we're going through at the moment?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It depends what you kind of look at as cancel culture. As in, what's your kind of...
Well, I think it's interesting because so many people have these beliefs where it's like, all right, we got to live our lives in this way, and we can only say these things, and we can have these opinions. And I'm obviously a big proponent of freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. And I think within this modern world, especially if you're in the public landscape, then you are often criticized for everything that you do. And I think it's interesting, and I don't know what the trajectory of it will be in the long term. So that's why I'm curious to see what you say about how some people are often lose their jobs for things that they've said on social media and the way that they conduct themselves outside of the workplace. And obviously, as someone who's worked in the Hollywood system, what are your thoughts on that sort of idea?
Well, yeah, if I can be honest, people are disgustingly inappropriate on set. But they say it, nothing's meant to be taken to heart.
Of course,
they're just... And I'm the type of person, maybe similar to you, I don't take things to heart. And, if people... I'm kind of aware if, someone is joking. And there are points where people can take it too far. And, a lot of people in the workshop, they take it too far. But, it's nothing of a level where I would deem, hey, I need to report this. It was all just said in good fun. And and in good faith, I guess. But it just depends who's there. I think if if there were any other, I know a lot of people in our cohort were very woke.
Yes.
And I think if they were in that position working in a workshop with, these really inappropriate people, they would not like that. Whereas I don't care. I
take it on the chin, move on.
Yeah, you just sort of sit there. You don't, respond to anything like that. But I was never ever offended by anything. And same with 13 Lives. Everyone's wildly inappropriate, but it's.
Well, that's the funny thing is that I feel like sometimes people make jokes and then people take it personally. And it's like you don't understand the separation of, the intention of what has just been said. And I feel like intent is so important because so many people, especially like the comedian industry is like really going through this at the moment where, a lot of people getting attacked online and stuff for, jokes that they've said, but their job is specifically to elicit laughter. And sometimes they'll say some fucked up things. Yeah. Sometimes it'll be funny, sometimes it won't. But when we go through this process of trying to cancel people and make them lose their jobs and so they lose venues and I guess keeping it within the movie related world, how actors lose their jobs and all that sort of thing. I just think we're on a very we're on a tightrope societally, if that's a word, at the moment. And our culture is going through a revolution at the moment. And I feel like a lot of good things will come out of it. But I feel like at the end of the day, if that pendulum swifts too far, it's just going to come back even harder the other way. I feel like that's going to be a tricky thing, especially because there are instances where people, say things that are not fireable offences, and yet they get a social media campaign behind them, and there's cancel this person. Like I look to examples like James Gunn, right? Mm-hmm. How several years ago he made a tweet saying something related to like some child pornography joke or whatnot. Anyway, a joke in bad faith, but a joke nonetheless. Anyway, he lost his job on Guardians of the Galaxy 3 because of the people that were coming after him for that. He then obviously got his job back because of the outpouring of the response in his defense. We look at recent examples like Gina Carano on The Mandalorian, who said some arguably silly things, but regardless, she has the right to say those things. Anyway, she lost her job on The Mandalorian. So it's just stuff like that. I think it's interesting because I'm obviously not a big fan of the woke politics that is going on in our current society. And the thing that I keep saying to people, especially within the film world, is that so many people in these positions of power, and I think you'll agree with this, is that so many people in these positions of power are old white people, right? But eventually, once all these old people die out, it's going to be our generation that come through and take over those positions of power. So I think
which is scary.
Well, yeah, but like I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the landscape unfolds over the next couple decades because, once our generation gets into those positions of power, then a lot of these things that we want to happen, like these, societal changes that we want to see happen where we, have equality of opportunity and everything, I think that's when those things will happen. Yeah. But the thing is, everyone wants instant responses and instant change. But that's just not how humans work. We're a very slow moving society, and oftentimes we're in a landscape where it's like we're in a big boat and the boat's slowly turning, but the boat's not turning quick enough for some people. And I'm of the opinion that I think we just need a bit of patience, and these social changes will happen eventually.
And I think our generation is kind of a mixed bunch. I think we're a lot more self-aware of what's going on. In a sense, we kind of think, hey, sexism or racism is actually a bad thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas in saying that, I think our generation can be a bit silly in terms of, I think, what's PC and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much to say. I'm just see how it goes, really. And I don't really think too much about that, to be honest. But
well, that's probably a positive mindset to have because so many people just get soaked in that social media bubble and they think that what is said online is often the consensus of what everyone thinks. And I just, that is not the case at all. And I find this interesting with a lot of politics that's going on at the moment is that you often hear from the far right and the far left and you hear these arguments and stones are thrown across at people and stuff. But I feel like the majority of people are in the middle and we see both sides. Yeah. But because we're the vocal minority, our story isn't told in the media. So I don't know. It's a tricky situation, and I feel like Hollywood is in a very weird state with regards to all the things that has happened to certain individuals who deserved some criminal action and stuff, like the likes of Harvey Weinstein and all that. But at the same stage, while some people deserve to be taken down, some people don't. So that's why I was just a bit curious to hear what your thoughts were on all this stuff that's been happening in the media recently. So
For sure, yeah.
But within the future, or within your foreseeable future, what are your aspirations and hopes within the film industry? Do you want to continue doing what you're doing with the projects that you've done thus far, or did you want to take a new direction?
Yeah, I mean, really, I'm just happy to be working in the industry that I've been working towards. And, quite frankly, I'm happy running around, to be honest. I don't really have a plan of what's going to happen. I feel like I'm at a level where I know enough people that I feel comfortable that I can, get something
that's great.
from them in a way, without being cocky or blowing smoke up my ass or anything. But yeah, I don't know. I'd like to stay in the art department. I think it's the most rewarding because you can actually see your work on the screen. And, looking at the footage on Elvis, it's, oh, hey, I remember delivering that to set when it was so urgent. Or, I remember blah, 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 whatever it could be. Whereas, if you work in a sort of office-y based job or even as an AD, you're contributing a lot to the film, but your work itself is not really seen, in terms of visually, I guess you could say. And I think that's why art is very rewarding and is why I'd like to stay in it. Where in art, I don't know. I'd like to get a little bit more involvement on set, I think. I know I said how much I hate being on set, but I still think to an extent it could be fun. And it depends where amongst the set you are. If you're away from the AD or department, if you're away from the grips or whatever, I think that's fine. If you're in art on set, that can be fine. No matter where you go, it's going to be stressful. Can't avoid that. But really, I'm just, I think harking back to job security in this industry, one good bit of advice that I got while I was on Elvis, they said, if you're worried about job security, you probably shouldn't be in the film industry, which I think is great, to an extent. He just said, you've got to love what you're doing. You've got to love this industry and you've got to be willing to, not work for a month, 6 months, who knows. So yeah, I'm just kind of taking it one step at a time, seeing where I go, and just very grateful that I'm working on films, to be honest. Yeah,
that's fantastic. I'll say you've already mentioned a little bit of advice that you got from someone else. Do you have any advice after the year and a half that you've been working in industry?
Don't join a film. That is my advice. No, no. I wouldn't really have advice. I would say just don't stress. Don't stress. It's a very stressful environment, and
especially when there's so much at stake.
Yeah. I think some people enjoy stress and work really well from that, but I don't. And I found that on Elvis, when I was getting stressed out, I would get flustered and I would make a lot more mistakes than I would have, or I should have, I should say. Whereas 13 Lives, having worked for 7 months on Elvis, having learnt so much, 13 Lives was probably more stressful than Elvis, but because I just learnt to manage it a lot better. I didn't feel a sense of, sweat dripping, the literal sweat dripping down from my head on, I didn't feel like my job was on the line or anything because I was very calm. And with that, you just work efficiently and without getting stressed. I wasn't making mistakes and things were getting done and it all worked out in the end. And I think if people just get stressed too much, stress is fucking awful.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah, so I would just say, take it easy.
Well, I'll say you just said you don't have any advice, but I would say that's very good advice. Remaining calm under pressure and learning to go with the punches, and it doesn't matter how many times you get hit. What matters is that you get up every time.
For sure, definitely.
James, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It's been a fantastic conversation, very insightful.
Not podcasts, Mr. Caleb's show.
Okay.
Show.
I will take that on board and think about it. But yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on. I know it's been a long time coming, so I'm very grateful and I've had a lot of fun. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, buddy. I've enjoyed it.
That's it. See you later, everyone.